Ladies and gentlemen, there is a sound moving through the world right now, and most people will never hear it, not because it isn't loud enough, but because it requires a different kind of listening. It's not the noise of trends, opinions, or fear-driven headlines. It's the quiet, persistent call that awakens something eternal inside a person, the kind of call that doesn't beg for attention, but waits for recognition. History has always been shaped by those who could hear what others ignored, by the few who leaned in when the crowd leaned away. We live in a time of constant distraction where voices compete for our focus and urgency is manufactured by everything except truth. Yet in the middle of all this noise, there remains a divine whisper that doesn't shout, doesn't argue, and doesn't force itself into your life. It invites. And only a small percentage ever respond. Not because they're more gifted, more educated, or more important, but because they're willing to slow down, to believe that their lives are meant for more than survival, more than routine, more than blending in. There has always been a remnant, men and women who refuse to live on the surface, who sense that heaven is not distant but near, that purpose is not a mystery but a calling waiting to be embraced. These are the ones who understand that faith is not passive agreement, but active alignment, not comfort, but courage. They recognize that being chosen is not about privilege, but about responsibility, about carrying hope into dark places and standing firm when compromise seems easier. This message is not for everyone, and it was never meant to be. It is for those who feel the stirring, who know deep inside that they were created to hear, to see, and to respond. When only 2% choose to listen, it's not because the invitation is exclusive. It's because obedience requires trust, and trust requires surrender. And in that surrender, ordinary lives become vessels for extraordinary impact. The world is loud, and noise has become the currency of attention. Everywhere you turn, something is demanding to be heard, seen, reacted to, or shared. Voices clash, opinions collide, urgency is manufactured, and silence is treated like a weakness. In this constant roar, people mistake volume for authority and repetition for truth. The loudest voices often claim certainty, but certainty does not always carry wisdom, and urgency does not always carry meaning. Noise can fill space, but it cannot fill the soul. Truth, on the other hand, has never needed to compete. It doesn't shout to prove its power, and it doesn't rush to validate itself. Truth speaks with a quiet confidence, a steady presence that waits for those who are willing to slow down enough to recognize it. It doesn't force agreement, and it doesn't chase applause. Instead, it resonates deep within, awakening something that feels both unfamiliar and deeply known at the same time. That resonance is not intellectual alone, it's spiritual, emotional, and personal. Many people miss truth not because it's hidden, but because they've trained themselves to listen only to noise. When life becomes about speed, productivity, and constant stimulation, the ability to discern grows dull. Silence feels uncomfortable, stillness feels unproductive, and reflection feels unnecessary. Yet truth has always required space. It requires a heart that is open, a mind that is not cluttered, and a spirit that is willing to be shaped rather than entertained. A whisper demands attention of a different kind. You cannot hear it while multitasking. You cannot recognize it while arguing. You cannot receive it while you are determined to stay exactly the same. A whisper asks you to lean in, to quiet your assumptions, to set aside your need to control the outcome. It invites humility because listening is an act of surrender. You admit that you do not already know everything, that guidance may come from beyond your own understanding. Throughout history, the most transformative moments were rarely announced with spectacle. They began in quiet decisions, private convictions, and unseen obedience. While crowds gathered around noise, a few were paying attention elsewhere. While many followed trends, a few followed truth. These were not necessarily the strongest, the loudest, or the most confident. They were simply willing to listen when others were too busy speaking. The whisper of truth has a way of unsettling comfort while restoring purpose. It challenges familiar patterns and exposes empty routines. It reveals that much of what we chase is temporary and much of what we ignore is eternal. This kind of truth doesn't flatter the ego, it reshapes it. It doesn't promise ease, it promises meaning. And meaning has weight. It carries responsibility, direction, and consequence. To hear truth in a loud world requires intention. It requires choosing depth over distraction and presence over performance. It means recognizing that not every voice deserves access to your attention, and not every opinion deserves space in your heart. It means understanding that clarity often comes not when you add more information, but when you remove excess noise. Those who learn to listen differently begin to live differently. Their decisions are not driven by pressure, but by conviction. Their confidence does not come from approval, but from alignment. They move with a steadiness that cannot be shaken by chaos, because their foundation was formed in quiet moments of listening. In a world addicted to volume, the ability to hear a whisper becomes a rare strength. And that strength begins to shape how they see themselves, how they respond to challenges, and how they recognize purpose unfolding in places that others overlook. Not everyone is meant to hear the call, and that truth can feel uncomfortable in a world that insists every message should appeal to everyone. We are taught to believe that inclusion means uniformity, that value comes from numbers, and that impact is measured by how many people agree. Yet the call that shapes destiny has never been designed for the crowd. It carries a frequency that only certain hearts can recognize, not because they are better, but because they are willing. There is a difference between hearing sound and perceiving meaning. Many can hear words, but few discern intention. The call does not announce itself with explanation or justification. It arrives quietly, often unexpectedly, stirring questions rather than providing answers. It disrupts routine and challenges assumptions. For some, this disruption feels threatening, and resistance rises immediately. Comfort argues for familiarity, and familiarity convinces people to ignore what demands change. Those who are not meant to hear are not rejected. They are simply uninterested. The call does not force its way into unwilling hearts. It respects freedom. It allows people to remain where they are, satisfied with surface-level living and borrowed convictions. For them, the cost of listening feels too high because listening requires movement, and movement requires letting go of what feels safe. The C all often comes wrapped in responsibility rather than reward. It does not promise instant recognition or guaranteed success. Instead, it asks for faith before clarity and obedience before understanding. This is where many turn away. They prefer certainty without commitment, inspiration without transformation. The call exposes that preference, revealing whether someone desires truth or simply affirmation. Those who do hear often question themselves at first. They wonder if the stirring is real or imagined, if they are qualified or capable. The call does not eliminate doubt. It reveals dependence. It draws people into a posture of trust, where confidence is not rooted in personal strength, but in alignment with something greater. This dependence refines character, stripping away self-reliance and replacing it with surrender. There is also a timing to the call. Some hear it early, others later, and many never at all. Timing has nothing to do with age or achievement and everything to do with readiness. Readiness is not perfection, it is availability. A willing heart hears what a guarded heart cannot. Pride blocks perception while humility sharpens it. Not everyone is meant to carry weight. Weight requires endurance, resilience, and faithfulness when results are invisible. The call prepares those who hear it to stand firm without applause, to remain faithful without affirmation. It trains them to value obedience over outcomes and integrity over image. This training happens quietly, away from platforms and praise. Those who hear the call begin to see life differently. They recognize that purpose is not about being noticed, but about being positioned. They understand that influence flows from authenticity, not from volume. Their lives become testimonies not because they seek attention, but because alignment produces impact naturally. When the call is ignored, life can say, it'll be full, busy, and productive, but it often lacks depth. When the call is heard, life may become more challenging, more demanding, and less predictable, but it gains meaning. Meaning transforms how people endure hardship, navigate uncertainty, and define success. The call continues to sound, not to convince the masses, but to awaken the few who are willing to listen and respond with their whole lives. Distraction is not just a nuisance. It is a strategy that slowly erodes purpose without ever announcing its intention. It rarely arrives as something obviously harmful. More often it comes dressed as opportunity, entertainment, productivity, or even responsibility. It fills schedules, consumes attention, and creates the illusion of progress while quietly pulling people away from what actually matters. Purpose does not disappear all at once. It fades as focus is divided. The mind was never designed to carry constant input. When attention is scattered, depth becomes impossible. Thoughts remain shallow, convictions weaken, and decisions are made reactively rather than intentionally. Distraction trains people to respond instead of reflect, to consume instead of create, and to scroll instead of stand. Over time, this constant movement without direction becomes normal, and stillness begins to feel uncomfortable or even threatening. The greatest danger of distraction is not that it wastes time, but that it reshapes values. What holds attention eventually shapes desire, and what shapes desire determines direction. When attention is repeatedly given to noise, comparison, and urgency, the heart begins to crave what is temporary. Eternal things start to feel distant, abstract, or irrelevant. Purpose requires alignment with what lasts, but distraction keeps attention locked on what is immediate. Distraction also creates a false sense of connection. People feel informed, elved, and engaged, yet remain internally empty. They know many things, but understand very little. Information replaces wisdom, and opinions replace conviction. In this state, people become easily influenced, easily offended, and easily exhausted. They are busy but not fulfilled, active but not anchored. Purpose demands clarity, and clarity requires space to think, to listen, to pray, to reflect. Distraction crowds out that space, leaving no room for honest evaluation. Without reflection, people drift. They adopt goals they never chose and chase standards they never questioned. Life becomes a series of reactions to external pressure rather than a response to internal calling. The enemy of purpose does not always oppose it directly. Sometimes it simply keeps it postponed. Tomorrow becomes the promise that never arrives. There is always something else to do, something else to watch, something else to handle first. Distraction convinces people that they will get serious later, once things slow down, once conditions are perfect. Purpose rarely waits for perfect conditions. It responds to willingness in imperfect moments. Those who break free from distraction often do so by rediscovering intentionality. They learn to guard their attention as something sacred. They understand that not every demand deserves a response, and not every opportunity deserves a yes. This discipline is not about restriction, it is about alignment. It creates room for what truly matters to surface and take shape. When distraction loses its grip, sensitivity returns. People begin to notice what they once ignored. Convictions grow sharper. Priorities become clearer, and decisions carry weight. Life slows down internally, even if it remains busy externally. There is a renewed awareness of direction, a sense that each step matters and each choice contributes to something meaningful. Distract. Xi'an may promise comfort, escape, and relief, but it cannot offer fulfillment. Fulfillment flows from purpose, and purpose requires focus. Those who learn to quiet the noise reclaim the ability to live deliberately rather than accidentally. They stop drifting through days and start moving with intention, guided not by what demands the loudest attention, but by what aligns most deeply with who they were created to become. Being chosen is often misunderstood as a badge of honor, a mark of distinction that elevates someone above others. This misunderstanding creates pride in some and insecurity in others, yet the truth carries a very different weight. Being chosen has never been about status or privilege. It has always been about responsibility. It is an assignment before it is an identity, a calling before it is a compliment. When responsibility is removed from the idea of being chosen, the meaning becomes distorted. People begin to associate it with comfort, recognition, or exemption from hardship. In reality, being chosen often places greater demands on a person's character, integrity, and endurance. It requires the willingness to carry burdens that others may never see and to remain faithful when the reward is delayed or invisible. Responsibility begins with stewardship. What is entrusted must be protected, developed, and used wisely. Being chosen means being accountable for what has been given, whether it is influence, insight, resources, or opportunity. Stewardship requires humility because nothing entrusted is owned. It is managed. This understanding keeps the heart grounded and the focus clear, preventing entitlement from taking root. Those who carry responsibility learn quickly that it is rarely convenient. It disrupts comfort and challenges priorities. It may require standing alone, making unpopular decisions, or choosing obedience over applause. Responsible. It exposes motives, revealing whether the desire is to serve or to be seen. In this exposure, character is refined. Weak foundations crack under pressure, but solid ones are strengthened. There is also a cost to responsibility that cannot be avoided. It demands consistency, discipline, and perseverance. It calls for integrity when shortcuts are available and patience when progress feels slow. Responsibility does not disappear when circumstances change. It adapts and persists. This persistence shapes maturity, teaching that faithfulness matters more than visibility. Being chosen does not isolate someone from struggle. It often places them directly in its path. Challenges are not signs of failure, but evidence of assignment. Responsibility attracts resistance because it carries potential for impact. The weight of responsibility builds resilience, training individuals to rely not on their own strength, but on grace that sustains them beyond their limits. Those who embrace responsibility develop a different perspective on success. Success is no longer measured by personal gain, but by faithfulness to the task. They understand that results may come through others, and that legacy often outlives recognition. This perspective frees them from comparison and competition, allowing collaboration and generosity to flourish. Responsibility also deepens compassion. Carrying weight produces empathy for others who struggle. It softens judgment and strengthens understanding. Those who bear responsibility learn to lead with patience and listen with humility because they understand the complexity of growth and the cost of transformation. Being chosen is not about being set apart to be admired, but about being set in place to serve. It is about showing up when it would be easier to step back, speaking truth when silence feels safer, and remaining faithful when walking away seems justy. Fide. Responsibility shapes purpose into action, turning belief into practice and conviction into commitment. Those who accept this reality no longer seek the title of being chosen because the work itself becomes the proof of the calling. Faith is often reduced to agreement, a mental acceptance of ideas that feel inspiring or comforting. Many people say they believe, yet their lives remain unchanged, their decisions guided by fear, habit, or convenience rather than conviction. Agreement requires little effort and even less risk. It allows faith to exist as a concept rather than a force. Alignment, however, demands movement. It requires the whole life to come into harmony with what is believed. Alignment begins where comfort ends. It confronts inconsistencies between words and actions, exposing areas where belief has not yet taken root. This exposure is not meant to condemn, but to invite transformation. Faith that remains in the mind never develops strength, but faith that enters behavior reshapes identity. Alignment is the process of allowing belief to influence priorities, choices, and responses, even when those choices are costly. To align with faith is to trust beyond evidence. It means acting before outcomes are visible and committing before certainty is secured. This kind of faith does not wait for perfect understanding. It responds to conviction. Alignment requires courage because it often leads into unfamiliar territory where control is limited and reliance deepens. In that reliance, faith matures from theory into experience. Many resist alignment because it disrupts routine. It challenges familiar patterns and exposes comfortable compromises. Agreement allows faith to coexist with contradiction, but alignment refuses that tension. It insists on coherence, on a life that reflects what the heart claims to believe. This insistence can feel demanding, yet it brings freedom. When life aligns, internal conflict diminishes and clarity increases. Alignment also reshapes perception. Decisions are no longer driven by immediate gain, but by long-term purpose. Fear loses authority as trust gains ground. Obstacles are no longer interpreted as signs to retreat, but as invitations to depend more deeply. Faith-aligned living reframes challenges as opportunities for growth rather than threats to stability. There is a refining process in alignment that cannot be rushed. Old habits resist change, and internal resistance surfaces. This resistance reveals where faith is still theoretical. Each step of alignment strengthens spiritual muscles, building resilience and confidence rooted not in self-assurance but in trust. Over time, what once felt difficult becomes natural, and obedience becomes instinctive rather than forced. Alignment does not guarantee ease. It often brings opposition, misunderstanding, and delay. Yet it also brings peace that is not dependent on circumstances. This peace flows from coherence, from the knowledge that one's life is moving in the same direction as one's beliefs. There is rest in integrity, a quiet confidence that does not need validation. Those who live aligned understand that faith is dynamic. It grows through action, deepens through challenge, and strengthens through surrender. They recognize that belief without alignment remains incomplete, unable to produce lasting impact. Alignment turns faith into a living testimony, visible not through words alone, but through consistent, faithful action that reflects trust in something greater than personal understanding. There has always been a remnant, a small group within the many who respond differently to moments that others overlook. While the majority move with the current, the remnant pauses, senses, and listens. They are not defined by numbers or recognitio, but by responsiveness. When others dismiss subtle promptings as insignificant, the remnant leans in, aware that the most important directions are often the quietest. The remnant is not marked by perfection or superiority. They are ordinary people with an uncommon attentiveness. They recognize that not every moment is meant to be rushed, and not every voice deserves equal weight. This discernment develops through patience and humility, through a willingness to be still long enough to notice what is unfolding beneath the surface. Listening becomes their strength, not because they are passive, but because they are receptive. In a culture that rewards speed and visibility, the remnant values depth and obedience. They understand that clarity often arrives slowly, layer by layer. Instead of demanding immediate answers, they allow understanding to mature. This posture protects them from impulsive decisions and shallow convictions. They move when they sense alignment, not when pressure demands action. The remnant often feels out of place. Their pace does not match the urgency around them, and their priorities do not align with popular expectations. This difference can feel isolating, yet it also becomes refining. Isolation strips away the need for approval and sharpens dependence on truth. In that space, confidence grows quietly, rooted in conviction rather than consensus. Listening requires discipline. The remnant learns to guard their inner life carefully. They create boundaries around their attention, limiting noise so that sensitivity remains sharp. This discipline is not about withdrawal from the world, but about engagement with intention. By choosing what to receive, they preserve the ability to discern. Those who listen when others ignore often carry insight before it is needed. They recognize shifts before they become obvious and prepare quietly while others remain unaware. This preparation is not driven by fear, but by wisdom. It positions them to respond with stability when uncertainty arises. Their foresight becomes a source of strength, not just for themselves, but for those around them. The remnant understands that listening is not an end in itself. It leads to obedience. What is heard must be acted upon, even when action is costly or misunderstood. This obedience is rarely celebrated. It is often hidden, expressed in small, consistent choices rather than dramatic gestures. Yet these choices accumulate, shaping character and influence over time. There is a quiet authority that emerges from listening. It does not demand attention or assert dominance. It is recognized through presence, through a steadiness that remains unshaken by chaos. Others sense it, even if they cannot explain it. This authority flows from alignment, from a life that responds to truth rather than reacting to noise. The remnant does not seek to stand apart, yet they are set apart by their willingness to listen. Their lives become testimonies of responsiveness, demonstrating that transformation begins not with speaking louder, but with hearing clearly. In a world full of voices, their strength lies in attentiveness, and through that attentiveness, purpose finds expression in ways that are both subtle and powerful. Obedience is often misunderstood as restriction, as though it limits freedom or suppresses individuality. In reality, obedience is the pathway through which purpose is activated. It is not blind submission, but intentional alignment with direction that carries meaning beyond immediate understanding. Obedience requires trust, and trust grows where faith becomes practical rather than theoretical. Uncommon impact is rarely the result of extraordinary talent alone. More often, it flows from consistent obedience in ordinary moments. Small decisi, ons, repeated faithfully, create momentum that eventually shifts environments and influences others. Obedience compounds. What feels insignificant in isolation gains power through persistence, shaping outcomes that could not be achieved through sporadic effort or inspiration alone. Many desire impact without obedience. They long for influence but resist instruction. Yet impact without alignment lacks sustainability. Obedience grounds purpose, ensuring that action flows from conviction rather than impulse. This grounding protects against burnout, confusion, and misdirection. It keeps effort focused and direction clear even when progress appears slow. Obedience often precedes understanding. Clarity comes after movement, not before. This sequence challenges the need for control. Waiting for full explanation can become a form of avoidance, delaying action indefinitely. Obedience breaks this cycle by prioritizing trust over certainty. In doing so, it opens doors that analysis alone cannot unlock. There is a refining effect in obedience. Each act stretches capacity, builds resilience, and deepens dependence. Resistance surfaces, revealing areas where fear or pride still hold influence. Through obedience, those influences are confronted and weakened. Strength grows not through comfort, but through faithful response under pressure. Uncommon impact often emerges quietly. It does not announce itself with spectacle. It grows beneath the surface, in consistency and integrity. Obedience positions individuals to be present at the right moments, prepared to respond when opportunity arises. Timing aligns, resources converge, and influence expands naturally without striving. Obedience also reshapes identity. It shifts self-perception from self-directed to purpose-driven. Decisions are no longer centered on personal preference, but on alignment with calling. This shift brings CLA, clarity and confidence. Knowing why one moves makes how one moves more intentional and effective. Those who walk in obedience develop endurance. They learn to remain faithful without immediate affirmation. Applause becomes unnecessary because conviction provides assurance. This endurance allows impact to mature fully rather than collapsing under the weight of expectation or impatience. Obedience unlocks impact because it creates partnership between belief and action. Faith finds expression through movement, and movement gives faith credibility. This partnership transforms ordinary lives into channels for meaningful change. What begins as a simple yes evolves into a trajectory that influences far beyond initial expectations, demonstrating that obedience, when sustained, carries the power to produce impact that is both uncommon and enduring. Only a few recognize the invitation, not because it is hidden, but because it requires a different way of seeing. Invitations like this do not arrive with urgency or demand. They do not compete for attention or appeal to ego. They wait patiently, confident that the right hearts will notice. Most people move too quickly, measuring value by immediacy and reward, missing what does not announce itself loudly. Recognition begins with awareness. It is the moment when something stirs beneath routine, when a question lingers longer than expected, when dissatisfaction with surface-level living quietly emerges. This awareness is subtle, easily ignored or explained away. Many dismiss it as imagination, fatigue, or coincidence. The few pause long enough to consider that it might be something more. The invitation does not promise comfort. It does not guarantee certainty or approval. Instead, it offers purpose, which often comes wrapped in challenge. This is where many turn away. They prefer clarity without commitment and inspiration without responsibility. The invitation asks for willingness before understanding, for trust before evidence. Recognizing it requires courage because it implies change. Those who recognize the invitation often feel unsettled at first. Familiar patterns no longer satisfy, and previous goals feel incomplete. This discomfort is not confusion. It is alignment beginning to take shape. The invitation exposes the gap between potential and reality, not to discourage, but to awaken. It reveals that life can be more intentional, more meaningful, more deeply rooted. Recognition is not an intellectual achievement. It is not reserved for the most informed or the most gifted. It belongs to the attentive, the humble, the receptive. Pride blocks recognition because it assumes there is nothing new to receive. Humility creates space, allowing insight to land and take root. The few who recognize the invitation often do so in quiet moments. There is no audience, no announcement, no validation. The decision to respond happens internally, long before any external change is visible. This private yes becomes the foundation for public impact later. What begins unseen gains strength in secrecy. Ignoring the invitation does not result in immediate loss. Life continues, responsibilities remain, success may still come. Yet over time, something feels missing. Recognition carries with it a sense of coherence, a feeling that life is moving in the right direction, even when it is difficult. Without it, progress can feel hollow, achievements disconnected from purpose. Those who recognize the invitation begin to live with intention. Their choices carry weight. They are less driven by impulse and more guided by conviction. They learn to say no to good things in order to say yes to what aligns. This alignment sharpens focus and simplifies decisions, not by removing complexity, but by clarifying direction. The invitation does not expire, but sensitivity can fade. The longer it is ignored, the quieter it seems. Not because it withdraws, but because noise grows louder. The few protect their sensitivity by choosing stillness, reflection, and obedience. They understand that recognition is sustained through responsiveness. Recognizing the invitation marks the beginning of transformation. It shifts life from reaction to response, from wandering to direction. It reveals that purpose is not imposed from outside, but awakened from within. The few who recognize it do not boast about it, because recognition itself humbles them. They understand that being aware is not the destination, but the doorway into a life that listens, responds, and moves with meaning beyond what most ever notice.